Hey, and welcome to YMI-Records. I received a nice comment on one of my last videos asking for a closer look at my microphone placement, so I thought I will dedicate a video to it. Luckily, I recently recorded an acoustic trio session, which gives me the perfect opportunity to show you exactly how I approach the recording. For this session I chose a different room than in some of my previous videos because I was looking for a more open drum sound. So while the setup isn't exactly the same as in the previous recording, the philosophy and approach remain very similar. The band consisted of drums, bass and a lead vocalist who also played acoustic guitar. The bass was recorded directly through a DI into my universal audio preamp. I added a little boost around 100 Hz and some upper mids before lightly compressing it with a DBX 160. At the moment, two AKG C414s are my go-to choice for acoustic guitar. One microphone is aimed at the 12th fret, while the other captures more of the body of the instrument. Before every session I always make sure both microphones are the same distance from the guitar to avoid potential phase issues. As always, the overheads are the foundation of my drum sound. I use two Royer R121s as a spaced pair and a single AKG C414 as a mono overhead. All three microphones are positioned at the same height, usually somewhere between 80 cm and 1 meter above the kit. The exact height depends on how much room sound I want to capture. I also make sure they are all the same distance from the center of the snare drum. Inside the bass drum I used an MD421. Since I already knew I would be using a second microphone outside the kick drum, I placed the MD421 slightly closer to the beater and angled it a little more towards the point of impact to capture additional attack. Outside the bass drum I used a tube microphone. I don't really have a fixed placement for this one. Sometimes it's aimed at the center of the kick drum and sometimes slightly off-center. Since I wasn't using a resonant head, positioning it was fairly straightforward. For the snare top I change microphones quite often. For this session I chose a Beta 57. I placed it about 3 fingers above the drum head and pointed it towards the center of the snare. For the snare bottom I used two small Omni condenser microphones. They are positioned so that the distance to the bottom head is roughly the same as the distance to the bass drum beater. One of the songs on this session was played with brushes, and these microphones helped me capture the extra sizzle and detail I was looking for. Sometimes I record the toms from both the top and bottom to achieve a larger, more open sound. I enjoy having fairly prominent toms in my mixes. However, in this particular session the drums already sounded big and open, so I decided to keep things simple and used Audio-Technica AE3000s on the toms. For the ride cymbal and hi-hat I used two AKG C451s. I often use ribbon microphones, but for this style of music I was looking for a little bit more top end. The ride microphone is aimed towards the bell, while the hi-hat microphone is positioned to capture as little snare bleed as possible. I usually keep both microphones very low in the mix and mainly use them to add a little bit more definition and clarity to the stereo image. And to be honest, I never record a drum kit without my Wurst microphone. For me it's one of the most versatile microphones in the entire setup. You can compress it heavily, drive it into distortion or EQ it as much as you like. But the most important thing is this: if the Wurst microphone sounds balanced, I already know the recording is going to work. When placing it, I always make sure it's the same distance from the bass drum beater and the center of the snare. I also try to keep a balanced distance to both toms. My go-to microphone for this position is the Sennheiser MD441. It captures very little cymbal bleed, which gives me a lot of flexibility later on during mixing. For the room microphones I used an approach inspired by Moses Schneider's Droom technique. Instead of using two MD441s, I wanted to experiment with large diaphragm condensers and ended up using a pair of AKG C214s. The result worked really well. The fact that these microphones don't capture a strong direct signal from the drum kit makes them incredibly flexible during mixing. I can process them quite heavily without losing clarity or definition in the drums themselves. Compared to some of my previous recordings, I tuned the drums much lower for this session. It's always nice to see that the same recording approach can work across very different styles of music. If you have any more questions, feel free to leave a comment. Thanks so much for watching, take care and see you soon. Bye!